Today we're going to continue talking about creating space, and especially creating space on a two-dimensional flat surface to make it look three-dimensional. Now we started talking last time about actual or real space, and that is when you have an actual like three-dimensional object, and the positive space would be the object, the negative space would be the air around it. When we're talking about a flat surface, the positive space is our object that we drew, the negative space is the space around it. Now, there are techniques we use to make that look three-dimensional. Well, the first one was overlapping, and that's where we have objects appear like they're sitting behind other objects, right away telling our brain that we have objects taking up space because something has to sit behind it. Then we have foreshortening. That's when we're taking something that we know is a circle, and when we're tipping it back in space, that circle becomes the ellipse, so that's on our cylinder. And the same thing happens with a cube form, that as we send it back in space, it is foreshortened. And when we start adding things like shading and cast shadows, that certainly helps pull off that idea that there's three-dimensional space. Now, there's a few other things. So we have scale, and that's when objects are sized appropriately when compared to each other. So we're looking at, if we did a human and it was larger than our pyramid, then immediately the idea of real space would disappear. The other thing we need to talk about here is proportion, and you need to add this to your notes. Proportion has to do with size relationships, and it's thinking about, if we're drawing a human face, how big our eye is compared to our nose, or how big is our eye compared to the rest of our face or our mouth. And there's definite size relationships that exist that if we don't do them correctly, suddenly we look disproportionate or like an alien, or we do not look real. Okay. Another technique used, and this is, we really focus on this when we're drawing landscapes, are foreground, middle ground, background. So foreground are the objects that are closest to us. So they are low, they are very detailed. So we might even see like the veins on the, leaves and plants that are sitting here. So we've got low and very detailed. The middle ground ones are less detailed, and they're smaller. So as they go back in space and further away from us, they're getting smaller. We still might see, we wouldn't probably see, like if this barn was made out of wood, we wouldn't see the texture of the wood, but we might see the planks, the lines and planks that separate, the pieces of wood. We also have things that are in the background. These are higher up on our picture plane. They have little to no detail. They are, often we know by reference what they are. So here, I'm going to do this, which is called a horizon line. And that is, so horizon line is where ground meets sky. So this is where ground meets sky. And you should have these notes. This is what I'm going to be checking. And we sometimes see small objects sitting on the horizon line, like you might see something that's a tree, and it looks like a little triangular blob, or depending on what kind of tree it is. But we know that that's what it is just by the reference and where it's sitting typically. So foreground, close and in detail, middle ground, losing detail, background, no detail, and its objects are very small because they're appearing in the distance. All right, so the next one is linear perspective, and that's a drawing technique we're using a lot in our warm-ups. It's used to create the illusion of depth in 2D work. There's two basic kinds. We have one-point perspective, where we have, this is our horizon line in the background, and we're pulling everything to one vanishing point. This is a very technical type of drawing. We're usually using rulers and other man-made objects to make sure that we are pulling very straight lines and they are agreeing in the background. We are doing sort of a generalized version of this bottom one in our warm-ups of two-point perspective. So two-point perspective, I think, is a little more advanced and makes things a little more dimensional, but it's, we're thinking corner forward, pulling back, and we're pulling back here to two different vanishing points. And it's where we're really showing the space in front being large, tapering to very small. Like as objects would go back on this line, they would be getting smaller and smaller very, very quickly. When we're drawing our warm-ups, we're loosely following this, but our horizon line, excuse me, I need to stay off my phone. Our vanishing points are much, much further apart, so we're not seeing them pull as quickly to these points. So essentially that is about it.